a notable address of the late Col John A. Gardner, delivered in Dresden in 1876. In obedience to a resolution of a public meeting of citizens held at this place on the first Monday in May last, appointing Col John A. Rogers and myself to deliver historical addresses, presenting the most important facts and events connected with the early settlement, growth, and improvement of this county in a tangible shape. For preservation, I am here for the purpose of performing the duty assigned me. In coming centuries, future generations of descendants, 400 of whom will then occupy every square mile of the fertile territory on which we now live, fishing in the same streams, cultivating the same soil, and gazing from the same lovely hill tops and fruitful valleys, on the same resplendent heavens, on which we now look, will read the annals of their pioneer ancestors and the simple history of the early settlement of their native section with the most lively interest. Many of the denizens of this county, 500 years hence, will bear the same names of some of us who are here today, and our blood will flow in their veins. This was once the hunting ground of the red men of the forest. The mounds are still visible in which their dust now reposes. We daily trample and plow their graves. We drove the remnant of their brave race far westward toward the setting sun, beyond the rolling flood of the great Father of Waters. And where the Indian's wigwam once stood, now stands the Anglo-Saxon's neat and comfortable residence, where he chased the deer we drive and plow. Such are some of the many mutations constantly taking place on our planet's surface. It is, however, gratifying to know that this is progress from barbarism to civilization, from ignorance to knowledge, and from fetishism to Christianity. Early appearance of the county. The race that preceded us in the occupation of this country were wild, untutored savages, unaccustomed to the arts of husbandry, dependent upon the fruits of the chase for both food and raiment. Consequently, the civilized pioneers found here an exhausted virgin soil, loose, lively, and prolific. The native vegetation of the country was excessively luxuriant. The wild pea vine grew in such profusion that the trail of an animal could be followed for miles. The barren grass, as we called it, grew 3 or 4 feet high and covered the ground as thickly as a good crop of millet. It afforded excellent grazing for stock while it was young and tender, and afterwards thousands of tons of very good coarse hay could have been made from it. A considerable portion of the eastern half of the county was almost treeless, and was known in our early history as barrens. Some of these barrens covered thousands of acres of level, gently undulating land, so nearly bare of timber that in some places you could see a horseman for several miles, with here and there small clumps of scrubby blackjack, post oak and hickory bushes a few feet high, interspersed with patches of sumac and hazel. All over these prairies and out in the edge of the timber was scattered the wild indigenous strawberry plant, which yielded a plentiful crop of the most delicious fruit. In early spring, these barrens rivaled in brilliancy and beauty the highest skill and most cultivated taste of the scientific horticulturist, in the richness and variety of the wild flowers that literally covered the surfaces. Here and there the traveler could see a cow or horse nipping the tender herbage, or lazily lying, with satisfied appetite under the shade of a tree, or more rarely a scampering away, frightened by the appearance of the newcomer. Sometimes a solitary wolf would glide stealthily and quickly disappear from view. Large bodies of barrens lay southeast of the middle fork of Obion River, in the neighborhood of Capt. James Smiths, extending to the Henry County line, and to where Mackenzie Carroll County now stands. Caledonia was surrounded by barrens except along Spring Creek and its small tributaries. The larger body of land owned by James Somers Esquire, father of Chancellor John Somers, 6 or 7 miles east of Dresden on the road to Paris Henry Co. TN, was mostly barrens when the country was first settled, also beyond Thompson's Creek, around where the late Samuel Irvin resided. North and northwest of Dresden, as far as Cane Creek on this side of North Fork Obion River, was chiefly barren, and in the northeast corner of the county, extending a little below dukedom, between the North Fork and the Kentucky line, there was a patch of barrens about Capt. Nailings, H.W. Chester's, and the Spain Place, also where Alfred Gardner lives. The western half of the county was generally thickly clothed with timber. The water courses. There were at least two very notable peculiarities about the streams of this country half a century ago that have disappeared. Their channels at that time were twice as deep, generally, than they are now. Their banks were so steep and precipitous that it was difficult to get into or out of them on horseback, so much so that the houseman was sometimes compelled to ride a fourth, or even as much as a half a mile up or down the channel before he could find a place at which he could get into it, and then perhaps he would have to go several hundred yards in the channel before he could find a place at which he could get out. I have on more than one occasion had this to do myself. Then the bed of the streams of all sizes were very miry, with here and there bodies of quicksand, rendering it more or less unsafe to attempt to cross them, unless you had some previous knowledge to guide you. In the western part of this county, I know an insignificant branch, a tributary of the Cypress so famous in early times as a quicksand snare, that it received the name of Grab Branch. It grabbed many an unsuspecting cow in a manner that cost the animal her life. The bottom lands bordering the watercourses were then lower, wetter, and more miry than at present. The same is true of the upland glades. Many cattle have lost their lives feeding around their miry margins. If the milk cow failed to come home at night, she was immediately sought for in those treacherous glades, and generally found helplessly fast in the mud. I well remember when the barnyard lot of Bondurant and Blakmore in this town was a whortleberry swamp, through which the strongest ox or horse could not have passed with safety. These swamps and glades have filled up from the washing of the cultivated lands, until many spots have been brought into successful tillage, where 40 years ago would have mired the stoutest animal. Farms are everywhere embracing these glades and invading these swamps, and I predict that in another half-century, the finest farms in the county will be on these bottom lands. Another peculiarity I wish to notice is this. For many years after this county began to settle at midsummer, the water was scarcely warm enough to furnish comfortable bathing. The reason of this was the streams were then fed by numerous springs, bursting from their banks and beds, and the margin of their swamps. The summer supply of water was, consequently, greater than now. I think I can safely affirm that 9/10 of these early springs have been chocked up by detritus carried down by the rains. This town, Dresden, was located where it is on account of a spring a little north of the present jail, from which it was expected the inhabitants would derive their supply of water. Still another fact I will record in this connection. It is this. At an early day our streams rose and fell much more slowly than they do now, because the water was finding its way to their channels through tangled grass and beds of leaves and the rubbish of the forest, than from the firmer surface of cultivated fields. The result is our streams rise quicker and higher now than they did formerly. SBRNGS. This county never abounded with a great number of springs. They were, however, once far more numerous than now, the reason of which I have already explained. They generally broke out or welled up at the margin of a swamp marsh. Settlements near a spring, as were those first made in the county, are not apt to be healthy, because they are genially located contiguous to broad miasmatic bottoms, where malaria is freely generated by heat and moisture from decaying vegetable matter in the summer and autumn. On this account, connected with their mode of living, the pioneer settlers suffered a good deal from sickness. Comparatively few families now use spring water. The cistern and well have superseded the springs. ROADS. When I came to this county in 1827, I had visited the country in 1825. We scarcely had any roads, if we are to understand the word road, a highway for the passage of vehicles. The early immigrants blazed and cut their own roads to a particular spot where each one intended to settle. The only means of intercommunication between the scattered settlements was a narrow, blind pathway, through the barren grass, often up to the stirrup, and tangled forest. And woe to the belated traveler who let night overtake him on his way. If the instinct of his horse failed to take him to some friendly roof, he had to pass the night beneath the open heavens, whether peaceful or stormy, foul or fair, serenaded most of the night by the fierce howlings of gangs of hungry, prowling wolves. Worse than all, at that time, the steep-banked, muddy-bottomed, sluggish streams were not bridged. Provision, however, had been made by nature to supply this want. Numerous trunks of trees had fallen across the deep channel of the streams. Approach a stream at any point at all, and you were sure to find nearby one of those convenient natural footbridges. On his arrival at the stream, the traveler would dismount, hitch his horse, strip off his saddle and tie